back to order. And we are on item 8.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the Finance Committee. Kim Malm, CalPERS team member. Congratulations on your appointment. Before you is an action item to approve the 2018 notice of election for the upcoming 2018 state, school, and public agency elections. These elections are to fill these 3 representative seats on the CalPERS board for the state member currently held by Teresa Taylor, the school member currently held by Rob Fechner, and the public agency member currently held by Priya Mathur. All 3 incumbents have notified the board election office of their intent to run for re-election. The election will begin on March 26th with the electronic transmission of the notice of election to CalPERS employers for their active employees. The notice of election outlines the election schedule and procedures for becoming a candidate. In your packet, you will see an updated notice of election where we have updated Mr. Lynn's name with Mr. Rubikava's name. And so you have a 3 updated notices in your packet that reflect that change. Potential candidates must submit a nomination petition with at least 250 eligible signatures no later than 5 p.m. on May 17th in order to be a candidate for the election. Candidate statement booklets and ballots will be mailed on August 31st, and the voting period will end on October 1st. The online, telephone, and paper ballots will be tabulated on October 2nd. Each candidate must be elected by a majority vote. If there's no majority vote in the primary election, a runoff election will be held. The runoff is required. If a runoff is required, the ballots will be mailed on November 16th, and the voting period will end on December 10th, with again tabulation on December 11th. The term of office for the newly elected board members will begin on January 16th, 2019, and end on January 15th, 2023. I'm going to give you a quick regulation update. The regulations that the board approved, the change in January, allowing for the placement of the perjury statement, signature, and other identifying information on the return envelope has been submitted to the Office of Administrative Law. The 45-day comment period began on February 9th and will end on March 26th. We anticipate bringing the regulation package back to the board for final approval and submission of the final regulation package to OAL in April. However, this is contingent upon the number of comments received and if there are significant changes that will require additional 15-day comment periods. One last comment. As you know, our focus since the member-at-large election that ended in December, we've been focusing on the paper ballot changes. However, there have been some issues raised by a few in regards to the telephone voting option. So I've included in your packet the process and the script of the phone voting. And I've also put copies in the back, and happy to take any input that you have on script changes to the phone voting option. This concludes my presentation, Madam Chair, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, great. Does not appear the committee, hold on one second, Mr. Miller.
Just one thing. There was an issue in the recent election with withdrawal of candidacy by one of the candidates, and it kind of became clear that while requiring them to withdraw before the submission of the ballot material, that's a financial hit to CalPERS, but to the extent that other candidates have written statements and then addenda based on who else is running and what they have said, it kind of potentially leaves candidates in the lurch if a candidate or multiple candidates drop out and there's no opportunity to address that in terms of at least their addenda. So I just put that out there as a comment that I think CalPERS should look at that and also look at the potential for litigation around that. The timeframes don't really allow that, but I think there's a real issue there.
Thank you, Mr. Miller, for your comment. We are going to be looking at the regulation as a whole and other modifications that we can make in order to make the elections clearer and more streamlined. At this moment in time, we're just focusing on the removal of the information from the ballot, but we will take that note and take a look at it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Ms. Brown?
Hi, thank you. I wanted to thank you for including this little, the phone voting process map. This doesn't appear to be exactly what I heard and a number of voters heard, because on the, I want to be clear, the confusion came with when you were listening on the phone, the recording said, remembering the order of the candidates. For candidate 1, press. For candidate 2, it actually doesn't have our name. It never said our name on the phone voting. And so I think if we're going to get that fixed, that would be really great. And it was very confusing. So I'm sure this isn't just for me, but we need to know what the option is for feedback on this from this.
We can absolutely speak to the vendor. I think that's a great ad where it says if you want candidate 1, Teresa Taylor, please press 2.
Yeah, it should have names. It shouldn't say remembering the
Okay.
order of the candidates. Who remembers the order of the candidates? I mean, it can be very confusing, especially if there's a large number of candidates before the runoff. So,
I don't remember it not doing that, but let me ensure that it does.
Take a look at the runoff.
Will do. Okay.
It definitely did it in the runoff.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah.
It looks like we don't have any other questions, but I was wondering, in addition to what Ms. Brown was talking about, I'm just trying to go over this really quickly. Is there a way to opt right into the vote? Because I heard that this being so complex.
So the process has to allow for all of the options that online allows for, which is why it looks awfully complex on that process sheet. In order to get directly to the vote, let me take a look at that and see what the quickest way is to go directly to vote for candidate. It's been a while since I've listened to it.
One
Yeah.
or two, or A or B or whatever.
Okay.
Because I voted online and I had already read everything I needed to read, so I just went straight to the candidate. I didn't bother to look at what their statement was or anything. And I think maybe it would make it a lot simpler for our folks voting on the phone if they could just do that.
Right. They certainly don't have to press the options to listen to the candidate statement. That's a choice, but let me make sure that there's a way to just go directly to or if there is a way for them to go directly
Right,
to
after
the vote.
they identify themselves and put in their PIN
Yeah.
and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Okay,
Or if
great.
they have to go through a couple of steps.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. So this is an action item. I'd like to entertain a motion. Anybody? All right, moved by Henry Jones. I need a second. Second by Mr. Miller. All those in favor of the approve the notice of election for 2018 CalPERS Board of Administration, State, School, and Public Agency member elections? Say aye. All those opposed? All right, seeing none, the item passes. All right, and then we are moving on. Oh, come on. My iPad got stuck for a second. We are on 9. I'm still stuck. Oh, and Mr. Taranto, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Scott Taranto, Chief Actuary. Item 9A is an information item that will go over the actuarial office's analysis of the long-term care discount rate. If you remember, and you think about over the last 18 to 24 months, we've looked at the PERF discount rate. We've also looked at the legislature's retirement system, the judges system, and the judges 2 system. This is just a continuation of that process where we take a look at the discount rate, the current capital market assumptions, and discuss our findings. Joining me today is Fritzi Archuleta, who will go over our analysis and discuss our findings. With that, I'll pass along to Fritzi.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Fritzi Archuleta, and I'm part of the actuarial office team. In October of 2012, the Long-Term Care Fund adopted a new asset allocation, and with that, the associated discount rate was 5.75%. Since then, the asset allocation has been reviewed twice and is still in use. The discount rate has also not changed from 5.75%. In June of 2017, the Investment Committee approved a new set of capital market assumptions. Specifically, the expected short-term rate of return decreased from 4.92% to 4.21%. The Actuarial Office has done calculations taking into account the new capital market assumptions and quantified their effect on the long-term care discount rate. We have concluded that the recommended discount rate should be decreased from 5.75% to 5.25%. If I can point your attention to Attachment 1, which describes how we derive the recommended discount rate. We basically looked at the cash flows for the next 60 years in the long-term care fund. Using the new capital market assumptions, the short-term interest rate or expected rate of return is 4.21%, and the rate of return expected for the next 50 years is 6.67%. We refer to this as the base scenario. And then from there, we calculated a single blended discount rate, which mimics the cash flows under the base scenario. We found this blended rate to be 5.32%. So common practice is to round down to the nearest 0.25%, and this is how we came up with the recommended 5.25%. On page 2 of the attachment, we display what the fund would look like based on several different expected rates of return. Perhaps it's best to see on page 3. It shows a picture graphically of what happens to the fund and its cash flows over the next 30 or 40, 50 years. You can see that the black line is the baseline scenario, where we have the 4.21% for the first 10 years and the 6.67% for the next 50 years. The red line is the 5.32% blended single discount rate, and the purple line is our 5.25 recommended discount rate. So using the recommended discount rate to determine the liabilities of the LTC plan, the margin of the LTC plan would go from a positive 12% and a funded ratio of 107 to a margin of about negative 1% and a funded status of 99%. At this time, we do not see a need for an adjustment to the premiums. In the April FAC meeting, we will come back with the long-term care report, which will display the results of the long-term care plan at the recommended discount rate and bring it forward to you for your approval. That concludes my presentation. I'm available for questions.
All right. I have Mr. Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I could support this recommendation because it's based on evaluation of the capital market assumptions, and we've used the capital market assumption changes to drive our discount rate for our other funds, and so it would make sense to me to use the same process for this fund. And I think it's one additional factor with our regular PERF fund, where we have 3 sources of revenue, where if the income is not there and the contributions are steady, then we have an option to raise the rates of the agencies, whereas this only has 2 sources of revenue, so it's even more at risk in terms of not getting the accurate return. So when this come back, I could support this.
Okay, this is an information item. I have no other questions from the board. I'm sorry. Mr. Toronto?
I was just going to remind Mr. Jones that it is an information item, and we're looking forward to board direction to come back in April with the results at the recommended rate.
Okay. So I would say that, pardon me? Oh,
Madam Chair, given the lack of questions, we can always move this from an information item to an action item if that were the committee's predilection.
okay. All right, so moved by Mr. Jones, second by Mr. Gillihan. So now that is a vote on moving it from an information item to an action item. Is that correct? That's the vote I'm taking right now?
No, it's, I think the motion is to approve,
All right.
okay.
That's not how
And we do have public comment on this, but the motion is to approve the reduction in the discount rate for the long-term care program from 5.75 to 5.25.
Okay, so I don't have to have a motion to turn it into an action item. Is that
Correct.
correct? All right, good. We're going to hold on to that. We do have one public comment. Ms. Snodgrass, if you could come to the front, if you're still here. There you are.
Hello, Donna Snodgrass, Retired Public Employees Association. I think you answered the two questions I had. If I heard correctly, the board does have to approve the action, and there will be no premium increases at this time?
That's
Because
correct.
of this?
That's
Thank you.
correct. All right. All right, so we're going to, we have a motion by Mr. Jones, a second by Mr. Gillihan to go ahead and vote on this agenda item. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Hearing no opposition, this passes. So we do want to thank you very much on this.
Thank you.
Thank
right.
you.
So I think we're back on, let's see, it looks like 10A. And that is Ms. Malm. Thank you.
Good afternoon again. Kim Malm, CalPERS team member. I'll be presenting an information item on the 2017 member-at-large election results. As you know, the member-at-large election was to fill 2 seats on the CalPERS board for positions A and position B. Position A was decided by a majority vote in the primary election, and David Miller was elected with 63.7% of the votes. Position B seat was decided by a majority vote in the runoff election, and Margaret Brown was elected with 53% of the votes. Congratulations to both candidates. Term of office for both elected candidates is January 16th, 2018 through January 15th, 2022. Voter turnout for this election was 9.14% for the primary election and 10.66% for the runoff election. This is an increase to the 2014 public agency election that had a voter turnout of 6.8%. However, slightly lower than the 2014 state election with 9.4%, and a decrease from the 2013 member-at-large election that had 11.5% voter turnout. It'll come as no surprise that the retired members were the highest voting population. The employer with the highest voter turnout was CalPERS, with 22.13% of the primary election and 21.12% for the runoff election. In the top 20 city category, Sacramento was the top city. 2 new voting options were introduced this election, online and telephone voting, and even though the main mail-in voting was still the most popular voting method of about 77 to 78%, we still had about 23% of our voters vote using online and phone voting options. And so for the first year, that's about 23%, almost a fourth of our voters. So change is hard. I'm okay with that on year 1. We'll continue to partner with Office of Public Affairs and Stakeholder Relations to increase voter awareness and participation in the upcoming 2018 state, school, and public agency elections. So what can we do to increase the vote? That's been asked over and over. And for those of you that have been here for a while, in 2010, we did do a survey of our membership, 10,000 members to be exact, 2,500 from each of the voting categories, asking them if they voted, and if they did not, why not? And the number 1 response, well, first of all, we had about 6% respondents out of all the groups. And those that responded, 47% say there wasn't sufficient information about the candidates. The next closest comment was 16.6%, saying they did not recall being notified of the election. So the CalPERS team has worked really hard to try and address a couple of these things. For the sufficient information about the candidate, we started the candidate statement videos, which we put on our external website so that our members can watch those. We also modified the regulations to encourage the candidates to answer 5 questions, standard questions, regarding their qualifications, issues of greatest importance to CalPERS, and what they would do to enhance the organization. As far as getting out the information, we have worked on an extensive marketing campaign with the Office of Public Affairs and Stakeholder Relations. It included changing the envelope to be more colorful to possibly draw attention, numerous presentations to stakeholder groups on online and telephone voting options, press releases, Facebook, Twitter, Spark messages, commercials for our website, e-blasts to our members where we have an email address, CalPERS Perspective article, flyers for the CalPERS benefits education events and employer forum, and toolkits that were sent to the employers. However, if any of you or any of our constituents have ideas to help us increase the vote, we are happy to get that feedback. If I may, Madam Chair, take a moment of personal privilege. I think most of you know that I've kind of been in and out the last 6 months, and my team and public affairs and the legal office have worked really hard over this period of time to ensure the successful completion of this 2017 member-at-large election, and I just wanted to thank them for all their hard work. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Malm. We want to thank you for your work and your team's work as well. We know that these things can get very out of hand and lots of complaints, and I know you've heard from me, you've heard from other folks, how can we increase our voting population? I'm also looking at it from our view so that we can figure out something on our side as well, but I think you did a wonderful job. I'm glad we're doing the corrections that were identified, and we appreciate that, and I want to thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Mr. Miller had a question.
Yeah, I've got a couple questions, a couple comments. I think most of us are just perplexed at the low turnout. I really thought that with the additional options and in the wake of what happened with the presidential election, that people would really value voting when they see what happens when you don't vote. But I was surprised. I was really surprised there. So one of the things I wanted to ask is, in terms of the timing of the candidate forums, has there been any thought about having those forums earlier so that with the bulk of people still voting by mail, and we know those votes that do come in early, most of them, more time for people to potentially participate in that might be one small thing we could look at. Again, trying to get viewership is another matter. And then the other question is more specific to this table where you've got the top 20 employers. That's both active members and those who retired out of that agency, or just the active?
It's just the actives.
Okay, yeah. So it'd be interesting to know how our retiree segmentation breaks down. I don't know if that's something we get.
By employer, we
By
do have their
employer,
age.
where they-
Okay.
yeah.
We did have like the age groups and how they voted, but we do not have the employer in the report that we provided.
Thank you.
And for the forum, interestingly enough, we've tried early, we've tried late, we've tried early and late in the day, we've tried lunchtime, we've tried a number of different options to encourage participation. You know, I think we need to have a conversation on whether or not we find that there's an actual value to the forum, since there's not a lot of participation, and maybe we could spend our time doing something more, something different.
I really appreciate you and all your team's work, and I've been at all of them, so.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Ms. Brown?
Has there been any thought to counting the votes that by postmark as opposed to by arrive date. I know this last election, there were several thousand that were not counted. One, because they didn't have the signature on the ballot, and I know maybe we're correcting that piece of it because it was on the ballot versus the envelope. But then a number of percentage of votes arrived after the final day. And when we absentee vote, it just has to be postmarked. So I'm just wondering if we could consider that, because you probably get several thousand more. You probably have the numbers there that were not counted.
I don't know if I have those right on me, but what we have run into is that a number of the post offices do not postmark the envelopes anymore. And so we were receiving envelopes in that did not have a postmark date. And we found this a couple of years ago in our election. It was, I think, the last retiree election. And so we didn't know after the date of the cutoff date whether or not it was mailed by that date or if it was mailed after that date, which is why we ended up changing the statement to be must be received on this date, so that we knew that it was mailed by that time. But there's a number of post offices that are not postmarking those envelopes anymore.
I think that's actually illegal not to postmark those, but I'll check with my father, who worked for the post office for 22 years. I'll find out.
Okay.
It might be, am I on? It might be because, I'm not sure, but if you have a postmark, it's pre-postage paid, correct?
Correct.
So maybe that's why. So, anyway, Mr. Jones.
No, that's okay.
Oh, okay, Mr. Slayton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm particularly struck that the CalPERS voting was 22%.
I'm particularly struck at that too, Mr.
I mean,
Slayton.
I just don't get that. Do you think it's a situation where, my vote doesn't matter, or I really don't know who to vote for, so therefore I'm just going to pass? Of all the agencies that should have 80 to 90% voting record, it would be this agency.
I couldn't agree with you more, and you asked me this question last year, I believe, and I didn't have any better of an answer
better
for
answer?
you a year ago. We advertise so much here at the at this office, at the CalPERS office. Clearly, we all know that we report to a board, and so I don't understand the apathy.
Okay, and in particular, the apathy goes as the age goes down, the apathy goes up.
Because a lot of times people don't get involved or don't feel like they need to get involved until they're closer to the retirement age. I think that happens quite a bit, which is why we have our older population that vote a lot more than our younger population, for sure.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
All right. Seeing no further questions,
Thank you.
let's move on to, thank you very much, Ms. Mull. Let's move on to item 11, diversity. Mr. Pacheco.
Madam Chair, Brad Pacheco, CalPERS team. I'm joined today by Kelly Fox, our Chief of Stakeholder Relations. Before you is our annual diversity report. I know it's that we're running long and we have one more committee, so we are happy to go through our presentation, or we can take questions, whatever the pleasure of the committee is.
How long do you think it'll take to go through the presentation?
10 minutes. About 10 minutes.
Why don't we do that?
Okay, very good. Thank you. So we are pleased to present this annual report that highlights our accomplishments to expand diversity and inclusion among our team members, the culture, and our operations and our investment portfolio. Let me just quickly acknowledge why you're seeing new faces here. This report has historically been presented by our operations branch under Mr. Hoffner, but our diversity and inclusion program joined the communications and stakeholder relations branch in July. So we're thrilled that they're part of our team, and we look forward to the opportunities in using our communication channels to promote the work that we're doing in this area. We plan to cover 3 areas in our presentation: a new enterprise strategy that has a renewed focus on our D&I D&I work, a snapshot of our current demographics, and then finally a recap of some of the work that our investment office has been doing. So I will turn it over to Mr. Fox to go through the presentation.
All right, thank you, Brad. There we go. Sorry about that. Thank you, Brad, and thank you, Madam Chair and Finance Committee. I'll be as quick as we can go here. I want to make sure we acknowledge all the good work that our folks are doing here at the enterprise. So my name is Kelly Fox. I'm the Division Chief at Stakeholder Relations. And so on our first slide here, we're going to talk about our renewed focus on D&I here at the enterprise. So a major change is the renewed focus on D&I. CalPERS has a long-standing D&I foundation that has progressed over the last 10 years. We had a diversity and inclusion advisory committee that we have co-created a renewed focus to move our organization to a more inclusive work culture. So sharing those highlights that touched our workforce, our workplace, and our marketplace. The key focus area slide will help us achieve our goals, such as talent management, education, and communication. So with talent management, we're connecting D&I and talent management to efforts to attract, develop, and advance highly qualified team members. And the education component, we're expanding and strengthening our diversity and inclusion education to increase inclusion and engagement across the enterprise. And our communications efforts, leveraging communication channels to present a consistent message, increase team member involvement, and showcase CalPERS as a destination employer. So how we measure our success, previous baselines utilized a different methodology. So we've got an enterprise-wide employee engagement survey that began in 2017 that serves as the new methodology to establish a consistent comparison from year to year. This survey found that, on average, 66% of team members agreed that, quote, CalPERS fosters a work environment that values individual differences and contributions. This measure focuses on our efforts to help foster a culture of inclusion that welcomes diversity of thought, experience, and background. We have learned that diversity within an inclusive working environment enhances the relevance of our work. It increases productivity and improves the value of the services that we provide. The annual employee engagement survey has several specific questions aimed at gauging the success of our D&I efforts. So just to identify a couple of D&I accomplishments, again, the report here, it focuses on the 16-17 year, so there's some things that you've probably observed and witnessed in the last few months that are not going to be recognized here today, but previous to that, over 1,000 CalPERS team members were educated through our training and education classes about D&I topics, and the feedback from those was a positive rating of 92%. So we feel very proud of the work that we're doing and providing the training is well received by the enterprise and the team members. The Diversity and Inclusion Group was honored with the Spotlight Impact Award for best practices in the area of organizational impact, talent management, and culture of inclusion on behalf of an international organization called PRISM, where in 2016 we were recognized, and then again in 2017, in particular the D&I group. Then over 500 team members attended the 10th annual D&I Day, and 81% of those people reported that the event itself helped them appreciate the unique differences and experiences of the CalPERS team members. So on the workforce, as Brad had indicated, some demographic information. So this is our demographics for the organization. And I think, well, in another slide here, we'll go over that. But the data we use for this report is entirely self-reported with information we received from the State Controller's Office. The previous methodology would determine ethnicity based on algorithms utilizing name and residential address, and as such, it was not as accurate and was subject to bias. And that was our information that we had received through CalHR. So the change in methodology has identified some significant demographic differences between 2016 and 2017. So in 2017, the CalHR conducted a one-time self-reported survey which allowed us to compare to the Controller's Office self-reported data, and this comparison confirmed that the SCO self-reported data is more aligned in representing the CalPERS workforce. So here's our workforce from 16 to 17, utilizing the newer demographic information that we received that we felt was a little more accurate and in its representation. And then our CalPERS employees compared to Sacramento County, and what we're finding here is that the general population here, as recognized by one of the most diverse cities, so we're in the top 10 in diverse cities across the country, and our workforce is very closely aligned to the demographic representation of Sacramento County. So generational demographics. So what we see here in this slide is our workforce continues to span over 4 generations, an ongoing trend as millennials entering the workforce as fast as baby boomers are exiting, leaving the overall makeup of our organization from a generational perspective very diverse. Generation Xers maintain their position as the largest group here at CalPERS. Millennial workforce is rapidly growing, is now about 7% larger than the baby boomers, and the baby boomers and traditionalists appear to be, as we kindly denote here, gradually exiting the workforce. So the next slide here, we'll talk about our gender demographics here at the enterprise. And what's important to note here is that we're within this optimal gender balance zone, which is considered roughly around the 60-40 split one way or the other. And as you can see here, our female component is nearly 60%. Of course, the male component would be 40%. But then for the entire team here at CalPERS, it's relatively close, within a percentage point of each way. So our team leaders are a good representation of the demographics that are here on a gender basis. So that includes our enterprise-wide slides here, but we want to discuss here real quickly the Investment Office Diversity and Inclusion Steering Committee information. And as part of the D&I 2020 plan, the Investment Office has made it a strategic priority to foster an environment of inclusiveness and increase awareness of diversity and inclusion issues. And so you'll see there from the slide, we have our investment belief number 10 and the sub-belief that is identified there. And we'll, on the next slide, go into the diversity and inclusion plan. This work stream includes initiatives aimed at increasing the pool of qualified diverse job applicants, team member education and training, and communicating with team members on developments related to diversity and inclusion. And then our next steps, if we look forward to another year, we'll continue to implement our new D&I enterprise strategy, continue to explore and develop new and innovative ways of sustaining our inclusive work culture. We plan to achieve this by listening to our employees through a revamped annual engagement survey so we can better use and plan efforts to increase our engagement by our strategic goal of 8% by 2022. Diversity and inclusion is not only a goal, but a call to action, a call we have answered on behalf of our members who serve those who serve California. And at this point, we'd be happy to take your questions, and I would note that our investment team is here behind us to answer any of the questions you have related to their specific programs. And then in our audience is our manager of our CalPERS Diversity Outreach Program, Ellie Rodriguez, if you'd stand and be recognized along with your team members. They're responsible for all of this work, and they're doing a fantastic job.
All right, thank you,
Madam
Mr.
Chair.
Fox. Mr. Costigan.
Just a quick observation, Mr. Kelly. I know, and I've raised this with Ms. Frost before, I want to applaud Mayor Steinberg for the Student Assistant Internship Program. I just do want to point out, we often talk about Sacramento being a region, and that's how they promote it. This policy, there are communities outside of Sacramento that are just as diverse, whether it's Elk Grove, Roseville, Loomis, Lincoln, Folsom. And the way this reads is we're excluding an entire group of students that are not, so I'm not quite sure how we have a limiting policy, because the way I read this, and I'm not referencing my high school, but I can tell you our demographics, even out in Eureka, are not, people may perceive where I live, that's not reflective of the entire school district. And yet our policy limits it to Sacramento. So are we going to look at expanding this? Because I hate to foreclose the opportunity to people that live in Folsom or Roseville or Lincoln, Auburn.
Yeah, Mr. Costigan, I don't know that our policy limits us. What we're looking at opportunities to expand D&I efforts here, so we'd be happy to take a look at that beyond just the Sacramento area.
Okay, but I just want to make sure, because we limit this with the launch of the new student assistant and internship program, CalPERS will be supporting. So if someone applies from the Roseville Unified School District, do they get the same consideration as someone from the Sacramento Unified School District?
You know, let me turn to Mr. Hoffner. I don't know how we would implement that through our human resources.
Thank you. So the program that Mayor Steinberg put forth was, I think, 1,000 strong or 5,000 strong, which is bringing as many of these kids there in the junior and senior year in high school to employment opportunities for a specific period of time. They identified originally, I think, 5 school districts within the Sacramento County region for that project. So we were able to take, I think, 4 or 5 young individuals within the investment office. We'd look to expand that. I don't see why the criteria couldn't be applied to others. One of the challenges for them, though, Mr. Costigan, is their ability to get here, and so there may be some challenges as the farther we get away from the downtown core. How do they get to the organization for those employment opportunities? So something we'd be happy to explore. I don't think it precludes others. It's really about trying to expand and bring youth into sort of internship programs and give them a flavor of what working at CalPERS would be like. In this case, it was the investment office. There's definitely interest in other parts of the organization. We'd definitely be interested in see how that expands beyond the 5 that spend about 6-8 weeks here.
Well, I just want to make sure as we're ensuring diversity and looking at bringing in more students, we're not excluding there's an entire region. I mean, it's interesting. Again, Sacramento loves to market itself as a region, yet I feel, and I've raised this before, so this is nothing new. I again, applaud the mayor on this effort, but I don't want to see us limited because you're in Elk Grove, I'm out in the Roseville, Granite Bay area. There are plenty of qualified folks, and I know there are plenty of people that would benefit from this program as well. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure. Ms. Mother.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. I note on page 10 of the presentation, you've looked at the gender demographics across the organization as a whole. Have you also looked at it for different program areas or broken it down a little bit more granular across the organization to identify where we might have opportunities to improve further? Slide 10. Yeah, that one.
There you go. We have not, but that's something that we can certainly do. I mean, this data is based on the self-reporting, so we could look at doing a cross-functional mapping of those areas and bring that back if you would like.
I think that would be useful, and also at what levels. There's well, I guess you have team leaders, which I assume is the executive level. I don't know how.
That would include all 300 of our managers and supervisors, including the executive team.
Okay.
So we actually did consider putting a chart up there of just the executive team, but we included the team leaders, which is a broader universe.
Yeah, I think that's fine, but I think that distinction between the whole, being more granular across the organization, I think would be useful. The other question I had was about, there's a piece in the report about suppliers and some about external managers and how we engage with them. But could you talk a little bit about how and if we incorporate this into contracting in any way in terms of reporting and also efforts to improve diversity at the vendors which we do business?
Sure. And maybe I'll turn to Kim Mom for that question, since she is the expert in that.
And if you don't know the answer today, that's fine. We can come back to it.
We do encourage, as you know, in our contracting, small business and disabled veterans business enterprises. We do not, micro business. We do not specify out minority businesses, but certainly welcome to take any input that you have.
I guess I'm not necessarily suggesting some kind of requirement around or quota or something.
Just reporting?
It's more around gathering information from our vendors and also engaging our vendors on the benefits of diversity and having a diverse workforce, and our preference for doing business with those who have a diverse workforce, or something around that. So maybe I would just offer that for your consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we could absolutely look at some sort of program that reports it, that they are able to report it. I don't believe that we have any authority to grant points for that, but certainly if it goes in line with our diversity and inclusion report on an annual basis, that we can maybe provide some information for the report.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Ms. Paquin?
Thank you. Along the lines of what Priya mentioned, I think that would be very helpful to take a look system-wide at the different sections of CalPERS and who the team leaders are and how they break out along the lines of responsibilities. Look forward to seeing that hopefully sometime next year. And I also wanted to congratulate the investment staff again on the Diversity Forum. That was such a wonderful event, and I know that a lot of people always look forward to that and being able to come together. That was very inspiring. And I had a question on the 7 board candidates that came out of the diverse director database. And I was wondering if how that compares to prior years and what are the expectations going forward. And are those 7 candidates from fiscal year 16-17 or from calendar year 17?
Thank you very much. And for the compliment about the Diversity Forum, I think Carrie Douglas-Fong is sitting modestly on that row over there, but she really led the effort. And just want to say what a tremendous amount of work it was across the whole enterprise. Anne Simpson, Sustainable Investment Programme. I think your question was about the reporting period for the 3D candidates.
That's right.
And it's a bit of a peculiar period of time because we're looking rather a long way back over our shoulder on what happened in the previous fiscal year. And we'd only just transferred to Equilar, to the new facility, and at that point we had 7 candidates. I'm glad to say since then we've gone into double figures. We're at 11, and my understanding is they're all female, bar 1, and that we do have a range of ethnic diversity in those candidates. We're also very pleased to see that some of the appointments have been to large multinationals like the Board of Shell, as well as to some California-based companies across, a growing number of sectors. But we are in the midst of an enhancement program because we know we've really only just dipped a toe in the water here. We've got a lot more work to do.
That's good news, good progress. And I had one more question, if I may. And this is for you, Anne. I was just curious about the joint engagement with CalSTRS with the 87 companies. And are you continuing to work with the remaining 66 that did not appoint any female directors yet?
That's something for discussion with STRS. I think we've ourselves broadened out our engagement with companies to 504. And STRS is actually focusing on some different areas on the diversity agenda, which we think are very complementary. So we've scaled up the number of companies that we're engaging jointly with Global Equity on the diversity program. But certainly we continue to work very closely together.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Miller?
Yeah, kind of to build on what Ms. Mather and Ms. Paquin had mentioned, when it comes to looking at kind of developing your ability with the analytics and looking at slicing and dicing things more finely, occupational groups, demographic factors, those type of things. Could you talk a little bit about, where you're going with that, and also how do you kind of work with and align or even integrate this with your recruitment, retention efforts, with your customer or workforce satisfaction, engagement, dissatisfaction type measures to identify what are those key engagement factors that will support both your diversity agenda, but also your kind of talent flow or workforce management for the future?
So I think, Mr. Miller, if we can look at this data more finely, as you've noted, it's an opportunity for us to work with our HR office. Part of the strategy that we've put together today or this year is to expand the channels that we're using for recruitment. And I think there's an opportunity to, if we can get to the occupational level, which is something that we'd have to look at on how finely we can take this data, it would open up opportunities to identify not only channels, but organizations or affiliations where we can meet the need of those professions, where we can get some more D&I professionals or expand diversity and inclusion.
Thank you.
Mr. Jones?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. You had two questions. One, I think, Ann, on the 7 persons from the 3D that were appointed to the corporate boards. I know that's still a small number, and so the question is, do you have any sense of how many new board members were appointed on the corporate boards? So I can get a feel for 7 out of 1,000?
Yes, Anne Simpson. It's a very good question. Perhaps we could come back to you with those numbers, because a data point from this year that I was very pleased to see that is among the new directors appointed in large companies this year for the first time, a majority of the new directors were female and or persons of colour. So we are contributing our bit to this sea change in diversity in boards. We've got a long way to go, but I'd rather look at those numbers, Mr. Jones, and see if we could come back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Because I don't have that at my fingertips.
Okay, thank you. And the second question is the ethnicity demographics. I was under the impression that we could not ask for that type of information, so where is this data coming from?
Yeah, the information is self-reported from,
State control.
I'm not sure what the initial.
Teresa?
Oh, Richard knows. Okay, well, hey, I lost you. Try again, Richard.
So my understanding is we ask applicants at the time they apply to fill it out as part of their application process. If they choose to, it's voluntary. But we have to collect it for federal reporting data, and we actually, Mr. Hoffner is going to come correct me if I'm wrong. And if the person chooses not to identify, the supervisor actually has to make their best guess based on the categories established by the federal government. Right.
And on that point, you may recall I was very disturbed about supervisors making arbitrary designations of members.
Yeah, so I think the one thing different that Mr. Gillihan just mentioned is that CalHR actually did a statewide survey to help clean up that data, because we've talked about this in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, that there was been a fairly low response in terms of people actually participating and filling that information out. We at CalPERS provided that survey to all the employees, and I think we had like a 90-some% response rate related to that. So the data that you're now seeing is reflective of the individuals here at the organization at that point in time have identified themselves at. So we're getting away from that point, Mr. Jones, as to somebody else identifying what that characteristic might have been, based upon sort of that eyeball test, which we've talked about. But there are other pieces that are used for that federal reporting that's required by federal law.
And if I could add to that, Madam Chair. So we actually, we did a one-time data collection because the federal government changed their categories. So our data that we had on file didn't match the new federal definition. They've actually expanded definitions. And at the same time, we also collected data on persons with disabilities as well as veteran status in the same survey.
Thanks.
All right, great.
And Mr. Jones, I want to say, I believe that all of the information that we provided here today is only from the self-reported. So all the information is not based on any of someone's guess of what someone's ethnicity was. And that was 10% was, I think we got 90% is what Doug
that was
said.
So the historical was at like the 9 to 10% response rate, and what you're seeing now is dramatic change. And so that slide shows you the difference of what we were reporting historically to what the actual employees are identifying themselves as, which is, I think, quite helpful. You can see the disparity and the difference. That's the county version right here. So you can see how far they were off based on historical data.
And these are CalPERS employees that you're saying identified. Okay, great. That's what I wanted to know. So that's why it's much more up to where the county populations are. Okay, so it's much more reflective. That's good news, and I really appreciate the report, you guys. I have, oh, no, Mr. Jones.
how are we collecting the data from our managers in terms of their makeup of their organizations? And because is that a different? I know it's a different process, but are we able to collect that information on our managers?
Are you referring to our investment managers, Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Okay. Clint's here.
Clint?
Clint Stevenson, Investment Director.
Pull the mic towards you. Thank you.
Clint Stevenson, Investment Director. We do collect that information, but we view it as part of talent management. If you're going to be an effective organization, you need to maximize your human resources. And if you're not considering a broad array of candidates, you're not. And so that's one of the questions that we're asking.
So you feel you're getting the proper responses on the designation of the ethnicity of these companies' makeup?
I would say that it's a work in progress.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
And that is, do we have a summary of committee direction, Mr. Avison?
Charles S. Bunting, CFO. We have in total about 5 items. The first one is a prior committee direction that staff to continue to work with stakeholders for possible legislation on school employee enrollment as discussed previously. The next item is on the amortization policy. We staff to bring back the opt-out option, addressing hardships and stress relief provisions.
Okay.
And also to bring back or resurrect the 115 Trust Initiative. Next, the election. The staff is supposed to review the election process to include candidates' name, as opposed to asking voters to remember candidates' order.
On the phone. I think
yes,
that was
on the phone.
Yeah.
That is correct. And the last items are on the diversity item that we just listened to. One, to bring back more granular analysis on slide 10 and on contract diversity as well. And lastly, to also bring back more information on board diversity.
Great.
And that's all I have.
That's a lot. Thank you so much. Our meeting is adjourned. Perf and Comp will meet in 20 minutes.
Thank you.
We had no public comment. Huh? 15 minutes, I'm sorry. Oh, no, we've got 4:20, I'm sorry.
We've already taken care of it.
All right. Is it already on the?
Yep.
Okay, it's already on the board.
He's got to get